Welcome, everybody. Today's America seems very different from that of even 15 years ago. People in this country and across the world are more divided than ever before. There's a growing hatred not just of immigrants, but of our own fellow citizens. Will we see a second American Civil War? How did we get here? In this podcast, we provide a basic introduction to the concepts of political polarization, looking at the demographics, political dynamics, and major causes. Political polarization is the divergence of political attitudes away from the center towards the ideological extremes of left and right. But this divide also seems to take place on other divisions such as secular versus religious, globalist versus nationalist, modern versus traditional, and urban versus rural. And we should also not neglect economic polarization of the wealthy versus the poor. American politics is focused around identity and an us against them mentality. This means that individuals who affiliate with Republicans, let's say, are now hardly ever likely to change their vote, even if they were moderate. There is also a focus on how bad the other side is rather than the positives of the side that you are on. This is known as negative partisanship. The statistics bear out how polarized Americans are. About two-thirds of Democrats view Republicans as racist, bigoted, and sexist, while about 54% of Republicans view Democrats as spiteful and ignorant. About one-fifth of each party views the other party as quote-unquote evil, and almost 90% of Democrats and Republicans say the other side is hateful and brainwashed. The polarization we are experiencing today is not new. It has been trending upwards over the past few decades. There's been a steady increase in polarization in legislative voting since 1979, and ideological differences have been on the rise also since about the 1970s. The proportion of people who hold very unfavorable views of the opposite party since 1994 has more than doubled. But there are a few rays of hope here. Each party believes that almost twice as many people hold extreme views than they actually do. A survey by the Hidden Tribes Project found that two-thirds of Americans constitute an exhausted majority who are tired of fighting and are politically flexible. Another survey found that a majority of all parties agree there is more common ground between us than the politicians and the media say. If we look at demographics, we find that America is becoming less white and more brown. By 2050, the Census Bureau projects that the number of non-Hispanic whites will be falling. The number of Hispanics will have grown by 60%. The number of Asian Americans will have more than doubled, and the number of African Americans will have increased by 30%. It turns out also that immigration is the single most important driver of population growth, as opposed to native births. This has important ramifications for political polarization. Ironically, a more pluralized country will mean a more polarized politics. Since there will be no dominant group to exert its influence, all groups will be competing to control the political landscape. White Christians, which have dominated the scene for so long, already report feeling like minorities and that they are being discriminated against. This is part of what is driving right-wing extremism. Politics today, to put it mildly, is dysfunctional. Congress has not been as polarized as it is now since the end of the American Civil War. Members of Congress across the aisle from one another are almost always in opposition, in many cases openly ridiculing one another. It is becoming more rare for any sort of legislation to pass. Budgets, for instance, are continually delayed. There are many political obstacles to pluralization. Unlike a parliamentary system where power is shared, the U.S. can have split power systems. The executive branch and presidency can be opposed to the Congress, and within Congress, the House and the Senate can be divided. The Supreme Court can also be allied with the presidency in opposition to Congress. Thanks to the Electoral College, less populated conservative states hold equal power to more densely populated areas. In many ways, the 21st century could be more dangerous than the 20th. Climate change is likely to worsen. Pandemics are predicted to occur with greater frequency, and there will be increased immigration, political, and economic unrest. These threats are likely to elicit greater fear in conservatives. This will make them more receptive to authoritarian, nationalist, and populist leaders. This in turn is likely to increase the reaction of the left against them, further driving polarization. Unfortunately, this is not just an American phenomenon. Europe is seeing a rising wave of anti-immigrant sentiment and a return to nationalism. This is particularly disturbing since these feelings were some of the primary psychological causes of the two world wars. Coleman in 2021 performed a meta-analysis of the literature and found no one single variable causing polarization. Instead, this research group found three factors, each happening at a different scale: the people, the group, and society. These factors all interact with one another, frequently in positive feedback loops. The people factor refers to built-in human biases that we all have. Most of us are not often rational, especially when it comes to politics. We are sensitive to threat, in particular when it comes from foreigners. We tend to believe what we already believe and rarely change our minds on political and identity-sensitive topics. The group factor refers to group affiliations. We are, of course, quite tribal, bonding with our own in-group and despising the out-group. Humans tend to conform to the norms and standards of our own group, thinking and acting the same way. We also feel deprived if one group gets what we feel our group deserves, i.e., losing an election. Political leaders use these feelings to manipulate and deceive us so they can gain power. The societal factor refers to social structures. Most large societies form into hierarchies. We see this in politics, in the corporate world, and in the military. Individuals at the top have power and use it to maintain their own power over the lower levels, while people at the lower levels attempt to usurp power from those above them. Research shows that hierarchies solidify under conditions of threat. The more insulated and competitive these structures are, the greater will be the polarization. Another phenomenon taking place is geographic sorting, where more and more people are living in an area where people around them share the same beliefs. In the past quarter century, the number of people in the U.S. living in a district where nearly everybody thought like them went from 1 in 20 to 1 in 5. Most cities now vote Democratic, and most rural areas vote Republican. If we live in a town where everyone agrees with us, then we are never going to change our minds.